Hello, welcome back to my channel and to this spring quarter reading wrap up. I'm trying something new today. We've got the Blue Yeti mic out, so hopefully the audio is better than normal. Hopefully, dear Lord, dear God, it's recording my audio and I don't have to do this twice, but we'll see. We're avoiding any technical difficulties if possible. So I read 14 books this spring. 11 were physical copies and 3 were via audio. I use Scribd for most of my audiobooks, and I can also access digital books that way as well, though I didn't do any of that this spring. So the first thing I wanted to tell you all about was Hat Atelier. Hat Atelier is a manga series that seems to have taken the internet by storm. It's the story of a young girl who lives in a world with magic, and as she understands the world, you have to be born a witch to use magic, and she's always desperately wanted to be a witch. One day, she happens to see a witch doing magic and realizes that maybe you don't have to be born with it to wield it. And the rest of the story unfolds from there. It's got beautiful art. It follows a group of kids who are about 11 years old. And so they're all hilarious and having this sort of incredible magical school time. And it's also, I would say, a lot darker than you might expect. Explores questions about power, about who wields power and how to wield it responsibly, and what is the right balance when we think about how we constrain that power? What are the rules we live by, and what are the things we sacrifice when we limit and constrict that power? Obviously, the art itself is gorgeous. I love the magic school setting, and the world building is really incredible. You get beautiful places, you get cute creatures. It really is just a wonderful way to sort of get swept away to another magical place. I gobbled these up. There are 10 currently out in English, and I read 8 of those 10 this spring. Next, I read Infamous by Lex Croucher. This is the second of Lex's historical romance books. I think these are so fun. They're written in a very modern, satirical almost voice, like this sort of knowing narrator. And they always follow queer love stories, which are situated in a time where queerness was not a safe thing to be or have publicly. But I just love these books. They are all the fun and aesthetics of Bridgerton. They're usually full of drunken debauchery and the nonsensical things that the elite and wealthy get up to. So this follows Eddie, who is a young sort of burgeoning writer, and her childhood best friend Rose. They're coming of age, and Rose is starting to talk about getting married and what her life as a wife will be, which horrifies Eddie. All the while, Eddie uses their time at parties and at big social events to kind of begin a relationship to a very famous writer. Not a romantic relationship, but one that she seems to hope will bring her closer to having her writing published. So we see them as they are coming of age and perhaps have very diverging paths, all while having this sort of deep core love for each other, and feeling the strain of those paths as they diverge. It's hilarious. And I would highly recommend it. It was a great book. Next was A Day of Fallen Night by Samantha Shannon. I made a reading vlog of my experience making my way through this brick of a book, all 850 pages of it. This is the second book in a series, but they're technically all considered standalone books. The first book in this series was Priory of the Orange Tree, and A Day of Fallen Night is set hundreds of years before Priory was written. So A Day of Fallen Night is high epic fantasy written with a feminist perspective. The book involves dragons, it involves LGBTQ relationships, and it follows a huge cast of characters across the entirety of this fantasy continent during a time of crisis. In this world, there are worms, which are fire-breathing dragons, and they are considered evil. And there are also water-based dragons that in some parts of the world are considered to be gods. The 4 years that this book follows is a period of time in which the worms, the fire-breathing dragons, have re-entered the world after a long period of being locked away. And so they are like destroying people's livelihoods, and we are kind of watching this handful of main characters try to survive, and in some cases try to get the worms like back to where they came from, which is this mountain called the Dread Mount. This book is beautiful. It's full of incredible world building, and if you want to be swept away to a whole different world, this is the place to get that. It is certainly a much more slow-paced book, and I will say the plot is always very intricate and like politically interesting, but it doesn't always hit the same highs as more traditional like action-oriented adventure-based fantasy. So overall, very highly rated. Really enjoyed the experience of reading. I would always recommend Samantha Shannon's books. I also read, and by read I mean listened to, the first 2 books in the Murderbot Diaries series by Martha Wells, All Systems Red and Artificial Condition. These are novellas, so they're really fast to listen to. I think they take usually about like 3 hours. Again, I listen to my audiobooks on Scribd, and they follow this Murderbot that is a sentient robot with some biological components in this like far-flung sci-fi future. And its purpose is to serve as security for different companies that purchase it. Murderbot has hacked itself and is actually in full control of itself, as opposed to being managed by a computer and a set of protocols. But this is a secret. It would be very dangerous and bad for Murderbot if anybody knew that they were like making their own choices. So Murderbot is just like a really hilarious main character. All it wants to do is like sit in its room and watch soap operas. It is really shy and doesn't really like people very much. And the book series itself is kind of like a Mystery of the Week style series. So the first book follows Murderbot on a mission where they're providing security for a research team, and they come under attack. And that attack is something that then Murderbot has to investigate to keep its clients safe. That then becomes the premise of many other events that we follow in all of the other books. I would say these are really fun, and they're pretty like easy listening. Like I usually put them on when I'm just doing like data entry at work or other things like cleaning my house. And I find that they are really funny and have a good like structure. Like I think Martha Wells is very good at creating just enough of an arc to fill a novella. They are funny and endearing, and I would say like serve as another entry into the sort of cozy fantasy and sci-fi genre that's really popular right now. I also read 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. This book is so stinking pretty. I have this one and the next one, and they are just like absolutely gorgeous to look at. Like the gold foiling and the way it catches the light, the gorgeous like cotton candy sky motifs we've got going on. I just love the aesthetic of this book. So the story itself is a retelling of a myth. I'm not sure what the name of the original myth is, but it's about a young princess whose 6 brothers get turned into cranes. And if she speaks, they die. So she has to try to find a way to save her brothers, all while having her own identity hidden and having no ability to speak about what has happened to her. Nobody told me that part of the way her identity was hidden was that she has to wear a bowl on her head. It's like stuck on her head all the time, which I thought was kind of bizarre. And it wasn't something that had made it into everybody else's summaries of the book, but I liked this book. I think I don't like it as much as a lot of other people on the internet like it, and I've heard it described a lot as almost like a Disney princess book, and I don't experience it that way personally. But the settings of this book are really gorgeous. It's in a sort of fantasy East Asian setting. The descriptions of food are to die for. And I would say the magic system is pretty loosey-goosey. Like, we're not getting a lot of hard and fast rules about magic in this book, but there's a very sweet romance in it, and there is a lot of the sort of fun and whimsy of a myth retelling. So I liked it. I think I gave it like a 3.75 stars and have started the sequel, but I haven't finished it yet. Last but not least, I read A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by Sophie Irwin. This was a vacation read for me, a beach read, and it was an excellent beach read for anybody else looking for something to wrap up the summer with. It is the story of a young woman. I think she's like in her early 20s. She's the eldest of several sisters, and both of their parents have died. And they have been saddled with the debt that their parents incurred before they died. So it's very important that she, our main character, Kitty, acquires a husband with enough wealth to keep her family afloat in her parents' absence. I loved a lot about this book. It obviously plays with a lot of like standard Regency tropes about a woman trying to marry wealthy to save her family. But I thought there were a lot of elements that were really interesting and unique. We get a lot about her own parents' story and why they were kind of driven out of society and the decisions they made around sharing that information with their children. So she and one of her sisters go to London for the season, and it is their goal, of course, to find a marryable man. And very quickly, Kitty locks her eyes on somebody, finds a good opportunity to sort of ensnare him in her trap. Which for a moment I was like, wow, this is going to be resolved really fast. What's the rest of the book going to be about? But as it turns out, the sort of man who has her attention, his older brother, comes home and very quickly realizes what she's doing. And so to protect his brother, basically is like, I can see you for what you are. You need to get out of here. You cannot marry my brother. And she kind of negotiates a deal with him where if he uses his clout, the older brother, to help her find an alternative suitable match, she will leave his little brother alone. And obviously that is who she ultimately ends up having this like romantic entanglement with. But it was really funny. It was really fun. It was surprisingly serious at times. And I just had a blast reading it. I gave this book 5 stars. It was an absolute delight. Well, there you have it. Those were the books I read this spring. I will say I think I am officially a historical romance fan. That was not something that has historically been on my radar. But I have really enjoyed the books by Lex Croucher and Sophie Irwin. And I think I want to read more historical romance moving into the future. So that has been like a fun discovery and expansion of the genres I typically read. Usually reading fantasy or memoir or sci-fi. So that was really fun. I was really glad to finally try out some Martha Wells writing because I've heard a lot about her books. And honestly, Hat Atelier has been an absolute delight to add to my life. A lot of this spring was a really intense period at work where I was working late a lot and didn't really have a lot of brain power to do a lot of reading for myself after hours because I was working on a big reading and writing research-based project. And so having Hat Atelier made me feel like I was still making progress and was getting whisked away to some magical place. And I loved it. Really highly recommend it. Don't be intimidated if you haven't ever read manga. This was my first manga experience, and it was fantastic. I'm looking for other manga to read. If you have any recommendations, please let me know down below, and let me know how your reading has been going recently. Have you read any of these books? What do you think of these books? I am always eager to hear what everybody else thinks. I think that's my favorite part of BookTube, is getting everybody else's opinions and hot takes on the books that I've been reading. So let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye.